Hey, pilot, welcome back to Ready for Pushback. My name's Nick Fialka. You found another fantastic interview episode. Today, I'm talking to a gentleman named Phillip Cooke. He flies for ATI, which is an ACMI carrier. He flies a lot of night flying, but his big hobby is Microsoft Flight Simulator, and we talk all about how flight simulation can really help you become a better pilot. It offers community, it offers professionalism, it offers opportunity, and and you can just knock the dust off of your pattern if you want to. This is a fantastic conversation. I know you're really going to enjoy it. So sit back, relax. Let's get ready for Pushback.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they are taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
All right, Phillip Cooke, how are you, my friend?
Doing great. Trying to stay warm. Seems to be getting cold everywhere.
I know. Gosh, man, this wintertime is no fun at all. We are recording in December, and even though you're on the West Coast, it's still, you as a pilot, you're just always out in cold places.
Had to de-ice at least twice. Flew from the East Coast back into, we flew into Ontario yesterday. I got off the plane. It was still cold. It was like 40 degrees last night in Ontario.
Oh my gosh.
Cold for LA.
Yeah. He's talking to Ontario, California, by the way, y'all. So you fly for an ACMI carrier, and so tell the pilot kind of a little bit about your background.
Well, I started off as a mom and pop. Got my private in Torrance, California. After I got my private, I realized this is just what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a career pilot. So I went to ATP, the Air Transit Professionals School, based out. I went to the Long Beach location. Did my my instrument rating, my commercial license, my multi-engine add-on, and my flight instructor through them. I worked as a flight instructor for just about 7 months and realized I really wanted to fly more than teach. A lot of people use flight instructing as their path to get to like a regional, but I just wanted to fly. So I started off my flying career as a right seat in a PC-12 for a small charter company. Went left seat for a couple of years flying the PC-12, the Pilatus, up and down the West Coast. Spent about a year flying the Cessna Caravan 208 for a FedEx feeder. So we'd fly from like Ontario to a bunch of the your Fresno and Santa Barbara up and down the West Coast delivering FedEx feeder mail. After that, I kind of got lucky. I went to SkyWest. But it was such a crazy time that people were transitioning so quickly. I spent all of 6 months at SkyWest, and I was scheduled to fly the E-175, the Embraer jet. And literally before I even finished training, a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, forget the E-175. This company is hiring, and they're flying 767, 757s, the Boeing 767, 757, and they're flying cargo." And sure enough, I interviewed with them. And so now I work for Air Transport International. They're a subcontractor for what most people know as Prime Air. So we fly Amazon Prime. They're based out of Cincinnati, but we're lucky we're home-based. So basically they fly me where they need me to. We mostly fly, to and from the West Coast. We've got flights out to Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Panama. We have a couple international flights that we do. We do like military contracts where we'll fly out to Japan, Singapore, all the way out to Diego Garcia, which is in the Indian Ocean. We have a couple flights that go up to Thule, Iceland, which is pretty cool. And so it's mostly, the majority of the time I spend is flying the 7.6, flying, all your Amazon cargo in the middle of the night, which, is pretty cool. You get to fly, these big airplanes, flying a heavy, it's a lot more comfortable than flying like your 7.3, or definitely more than your E175. But some of our hours can be a little bit of a downer. I'd say my typical hours are between like the hours of like 10 p.m. and like 8 a.m. is when we're normally out with all the cargo. Passengers fly during the day, cargo flies at night.
Yeah, that's true. As a fellow 7.5 and 7.6 driver, it's amazing how nice and quiet it is and how
Oh
massive
yeah,
power, But I
oh
will
yeah,
say for the 175, that is an advanced machine. Like you're going to
oh
be
yeah.
in the 7.8 or the 350 before you have something as swanky as the Embraer 175.
I often joke about how when I was flying a PC-12, we started on the Legacy, which was like a mixture of the old electronics and round gauges, and then I flew the NGX, which has the really advanced Honeywell electronics with all the uh, internet and radar information that was integrated into it. And then I come to the 7.6 and I'm like, wait a minute, where's my XNav? We don't even have Wi-Fi set up. And I'm just like,
Yep. It's an old airplane.
yeah,
Nothing like a brown dashboard.
yeah.
So tell me, you're a big time gamer too. Talk to me about how you got into gaming and Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's so interesting to me.
Well, it's funny because my dad got his private license back in the early 90s. And so I actually started off with, I'm trying to remember which version it was. Was it, uh, did they have like, was it 3.1? Like back when it was still just like boxes and polygons, like just real rudimentary. I remember my dad he was learning, and we had the yoke that was made out of like PVC pipe and stuff like that. So I had like real old school. I used to love like just messing around. One of the things that is kind of that I think is kind of lost with the newer versions was the original versions. You could actually create your own airplane. You could modify the airplanes, So I used to love just modifying the airplanes to try to see how fast I could get them, making the angles before it became unstable. And so that used to be a fun little thing you could do. And then, for the longest, I was always heavy duty. Like I had pretty much all of the flight simulators. I was really big into X-Plane because I just enjoyed I found the flight dynamics and realism was a little higher, but I always kept Microsoft Flight Simulator. I loved just X-Plane was good, but at the time, Flight Sim just seemed to have a slight better level of diversity when it came to the aircraft. Where X-Plane, it had fewer aircraft, but they seemed to focus a little more on the realism, which was cool. I have the whole setup myself. I do a lot of my flying in VR now, and that's just knocked everything up to another level. If you're ever thought about like doing like the big triple monitor setup, or trying to find a way to increase the immersion, VR just seems to be the way to go. It's nothing better than just having that complete seclusion of being in that airplane and looking around. I have the Alpha yoke. I use two throttle quadrants. So I have the Airbus throttle quadrant that I use from what was that? And that just locks in my Airbus aircraft right there. But I also have the SciTech uh, throttle quadrants with a 737 mod, so I get that feel of flying a 737 on it. And basic SciTech rudders and stuff like that. A good hack that I did is you can buy those racing wheel stands,
Hmm.
and so I have it all set up on a racing wheel stand, which is pretty cool. And so it just gives me that immersion, to have instead of having it on your desk and having it like in this area with the racing stands, it puts it like further down by your side, so you can have almost that realism of that throw. And so, I get into it easily. I do a lot of the VAT simming, which is the online multiplayer flying. That's, you know, other than just having that air traffic controller to kind of like help guide me and help push me towards getting the communications done. I also find that having other players around, it kind of pushes me to be as realistic as possible. I'm not just playing around and just running across runways and just, flying wherever I want, having that sense of community and talking to other individuals and coordinating, has definitely stepped up my sense of simming as well. If I had to put some numbers to it, I've probably dropped easily $5,000 to $6,000 just in gaming PC and peripherals and, airplanes. I like to, one of the things I like to do, there's a small branch of us. We buy like almost every airplane because we like to fly the actual plane for the actual route.
Wild. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So tell me, I know Microsoft Flight Sim is nothing like having like a Redbird or something like that, but it seems like it gives you a good amount of flexibility and a little bit of a new dynamic to practice your flying skills, even if you're in training. Is that something that people do?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd say one of the greatest things, especially with the new Flight Sim 2020 and Flight Sim 24, that I had actually incorporated into X-Plane. Like if you're coming from, it's just the photogrammic scenery. You know, I often, especially if I'm going to do a flight VFR, I'll practice in Flight Sim 2020 and 2024 now, because just the accuracy of just being able to see where buildings are and hills and tracking highways and things like that. For example, I did a flight from Hawthorne, California down to McGuire Field, which is just north of San Diego. And so I remember I was scheduled to do that flight, and there is a visual approach. And part of the visual approach is you stay north of this hill and you basically track the highway till you get to this hill. And then you make a left turn, you make a left downwind into the airport. And it has basically like a small ring of mountains that goes through the outside of the airport. And so when I was looking it up, they were like, expect to follow this approach. And so as I'm coming in, I just remember using the sim to get my bearings, look around, and I'm like, okay, there's the hill. Having that topographic information, having that reference is a good thing. And just being able to know, okay, the airport's going to be right off here off my left. And sure enough, when I flew it in real life, before I even came in, the first thing the controller said was like, are you aware of the approach? Do you know what to look for? And I'm like, you know what? I do know what to look for. I did see it in the sim. It was nice to have that visual reference and know, yeah, boom, the highway's going to be there. Boom, the hill's going to be there, and the airport is going to be there. So that helped a lot as far as VFR flying. Another thing I love is if you're doing instrument flying and you're working on the instrument, it's an almost must. Having the ability to have the current navigation data, using those charts, being in that environment, being engrossed in it, and trying to land with while looking at those charts, keeping to those restrictions and following the rules. There's so many times just having that proficiency is very important. I worked the company I worked for before. I was talking to a friend of mine who was a hiring manager, and he was telling me, he was like, they had a hard time because it was very evident that a lot of pilots weren't staying proficient on their instrument. They were forgetting the basic rules. They were forgetting what they were looking at when they were looking at charts. They were having a hard time following glide slopes or keeping to restrictions. Where if you're in the sim and you're practicing, it's being in the sim is so valuable to a pilot that even the FAA has allowed you to translate, qualified sim time, obviously in a more advanced simulator, towards your currency. You can log that time. And so practicing at home on your flight sim just locks it in so much easier, because you get to do it on your own time. You get to do it as frequently as you want. You don't have to wait, because sometimes, especially even if you're flying professionally, you may not shoot approaches. You may, I worked at a company where pretty much we were out in Hawaii. 90% of the time it was, you might depart via instrument and then immediately, boom, go VFR. So you were never shooting an instrument approach. We went almost like a year without shooting an instrument approach. And so the only way we were able to keep that proficiency was to practice and then do sim time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think it's important to mention like a Class D sim is like a full motion sim, and that's the one you can certainly log time for. But the beauty of the Microsoft Flight Sim is that it's an affordable way that you can get reps. You can practice without anybody like judging you, and you can feel free to mess up as many times. You can bone it up and learn from your mistakes. And I think that's most important is the access um, to those instruments and to the visuals to be able to get it done, but also you don't have to burn the gas money, right? It's
Yeah.
you don't get the hours, but if you're not flying, a great opportunity to dive in there. And one of the things you talked about was the online community.
Mhm.
How has that been helpful for you in your journey?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing, it has to be, communications is always the huge barrier for a lot of students. Having that fear of talking to an air traffic controller, um, to instructions, obviously. I once flew with a student. We were coming in for an approach, and so we would typically come in and enter in a right downwind to enter this runway. It had two runways. We would come in a right downwind. Uh, and so one day we were coming in, and the controller literally threw him for a loop. And so as we were coming in, the controller said, "Yeah, the right downwind is full right now. I'm going to need you to enter the left downwind for the parallel." And I remember being with the student, and I'm like, all right, so it's going to be easy. Instead of going across the runway and entering the right downwind, we're just going to go ahead and enter the left downwind and take the closest runway. And he looked at me and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then he
Poor
started
kid.
freaking out a little bit.
Yeah.
He was like, he's like, I don't, what did he just say? I don't understand. And I'm like, okay, just calm down. And I realized that, if he had spent that a little more time, I recommended to him going on VATSIM, the VATSIM controllers will help him understand where, out in real life, we're entering in a pattern where there's a lot of training aircraft and he's having a hard time understand. And he's like, it can be really nerve wracking to hear a command from an air traffic controller and just be completely lost, and then you're turning around and you're just like, what's happening again? And then that's where accidents happen. That's where people start getting a little behind the ball, and you're just like, okay, it's good to practice. As much as I'd like to sit down with every student and just go over communication, sometimes you don't have that time, or sometimes those students, you have bills to pay, so you can't just sit there and do it for free, unfortunately. Where Pilot Edge and VATSIM are the two, I think, most popular online ATC networks. And so with those networks, you're multi-plane, so you have other pilots there. So, but the big thing I think I recommend people use those for is the communications. Practicing your communications, practicing flight rules, and things of that nature. Another thing is when you're doing the online, the multiplayer, one of the things I like is you get a sense of that you're not alone, right? You're not the only one taxiing to the runway. You're looking out for other aircraft, you know. And so I think that also brings a side of immersion, that where if you're let's say just doing multiplayer, or you're using the AI, you could just kind of like skirt around it and do whatever.
Tell me some more about like the benefits you get out of the multiplayer.
One of the things I really like about it is it forces you to understand what you're doing, especially things like knowing the weather, knowing where you can and cannot be. There are some times in which, let's say I'm flying like a big airliner and I decide I want to go into a specific airport. I may look at it and just be like, oh yeah, there looks like a runway right there. I'm just going to land there. I may not have planned that well ahead. And then all of a sudden, air traffic control is telling me, oh no, this is the runway you should expect. This is the approach you should expect. And now, I've had plenty of times in which I've come in, and then just by getting a specific instruction, I'm like, oh my God, now I got to plan for this other runway. Let me look at the chart real quick. Let me get the something like the frequencies and all that stuff plugged in, which I wasn't even prepared for. But it happens in real life.
Do they have NOTAMs and things like that in the multiplayer game?
Oh yeah. Oh well, a lot of times they'll try to follow real world NOTAMs. So you may come in and maybe a runway may be closed, and in your sim it's not closed. In your sim everything is fine, but in the multiplayer they kind of force you to follow their rules, which is they try to follow real world rules. You know.
Are people meowing on guard?
That's a funny thing. For the longest, that sim didn't have guard, and they just started implementing guard. And sure enough, you'll hear a meow every now and then. People get bored. People get bored sometimes.
Well, so that leads me to my next question, right? So
Mhm.
when I worked at a consulting company in a prior life, and this was many years ago, but one of the guys that worked there, his name was Ivan. He was so cool. He was a retired military person, but he had this group of buddies around the world where they would go fly air. He had his own little airline set up on the internet,
Nice.
and they would fly these routes, like virtually fly, no graphics or things like that, but they would, I
Hmm.
mean, it would take like 3 and 5 and 7 hours of them sitting there kind of making logs about what the flight is. And it's, there's a whole nother world to me, but are people doing flights that are like 2 and 3 and 4 hours long?
Oh, even more. You know, I do the virtual airlines myself, so I belong to a bunch of them. What I'd say one of the biggest ones is I belong to virtual FedEx. And so with virtual FedEx, they'll have the routes, they have all the notes. You have to fly the specific aircraft that for that fleet. And so I've done flights from one of the most common ones I used to do all the time was from online. I would do Memphis to Frankfurt.
Wow.
That's like a 9 hour flight. I've done LA to Haneda. That was like around 11 hours, all online with VATSIM. You
Do
know,
you have
uh,
do you have to know what the purple promise is if you're going to go work with FedEx? Do you know what that is?
I don't know what the purple promise is. What's the purple
Oh,
promise?
the purple promise is I will make every customer's experience exceptional. I think that's what the
Oh,
purple
that
promise says.
is.
But anyway, they'll ask if hey, anybody that's going to ever interview with FedEx, that's one of the things you should know.
The purple promise. Well, one of the cool things about being with the virtual airlines is, again, it just comes down to realism and accountability. So they want you to follow their routes. They want you to fly their aircraft. They want you to go to their airports, and they judge you on everything. If you land too hard, those flights can be disqualified. So you could be flying like a multi-hour flight, land, something mess up, and you land, let's say 700-800 feet per minute. You don't want to land that hard, but if you're just coming into it and you're still feeling the airplane out, those things can happen. You could have
Less than
just wasted that
600 feet per
entire.
minute on an airliner,
Yeah,
just less than, especially the longer ones.
yeah. And so you want to feel it out. It's funny because I remember when I first started, I was talking to a pilot, airline pilot, and I told him, I was like, yeah, I like the flight sim all the time. And the first thing he tells me is, it's harder in a flight sim than it is in real life. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, you don't get that same feel. So he's like, if you're good at flight sim, you'll find it's not as hard when you fly in real life.
Even in the big class D sims that
Mhm.
for as a 7.5, 7.6 person, those sims are archaic. They're 30 years old
Yeah.
plus, and they certainly don't fly like the real aircraft. They're very difficult to fly, which makes training really dang hard. No matter how the realism is, the sim is always just any kind of simulation is always harder than the real thing.
I think what's funny is, I've never gotten air sick or motion sick in the airplane. But as soon as I started getting stuck in level D's, like that first movement when it starts moving and shifting back, you'll feel it. You'll feel it. You're just like, oh, it'll get you motion sick after a while.
I feel like that's how I would be if I had to put on a virtual reality helmet, man. Like I feel like I would lose it in a quick second.
Funny enough, I don't know why, but I've heard some people that happens, but for me, I don't know. It just I haven't felt that motion sickness, but I definitely get it. Like if I'm on a boat, I'll feel it. I had one captain actually. It was kind of funny. Uh, when I was in flight school, I had one guy who just could just could not trim the airplane out to save his life. And so we were flying cross country, and every freaking few minutes he would just push it, and I'm just like, trim the damn plane out, man. And so the other day I was flying with a captain who decided to hand fly all the way up to 18,000 feet. And it was the first time in like 2 years working for this company where I'm just like, dude, just throw the autopilot on. I don't know what you're doing, but he's just bobbing the airplane up.
Oh, really? On a
Yeah.
7.5?
Yeah. And I was just like, what are you doing? And he's like, dude, I've been sitting at home for like 2 months on reserve. He's like, I haven't even touched this airplane. I need to get back into it.
Yeah. You got
I'm like,
it's just in case you're wondering, it's about 7 minutes from takeoff to 18,000 feet when you're hand flying. It's about 7 minutes. So it's if you make it all the way to 18, like you're only getting 7 minutes of hand flying.
yeah, so it was just funny. But yeah, well, like I said, I think for me, one of the things about the new 2024 is they talk about the gamification. And so there was a funny video I watched the other day, and he was talking about what we call dad games. You heard of dad games?
I have not heard. I need one. I guess I'm a dad.
Well, the dad games the joke is you start off your gamer life just playing exciting, games like shooters and sport games and stuff like that, things that are just so outside the realm of reality. And then as you get older, you fall into this thing of doing careers that you do or you're interested in doing. So that's where, the rise of the truck simulator and flight and train simulators are. And so it's kind of like, when you think about it, it can be kind of boring to somebody who's not interested in that type of thing, but really you're just living someone else's career.
Oh, that's so funny.
And so they called it the dad game. And so it's so funny because I tried to get my girlfriend into flight simming with me. So I'm like, yeah, we can flight sim together, and we can, she can be my co-pilot, and we can work on this stuff and bring up that realism and enjoy it together. And she'll be like, yeah, I can't stay here for more than 30 minutes.
Listen, that's a sweet girl right there. Listen, I think that is very typical. I have a bunch of friends that are big time gamers, and now let me ask you: are you the kind of person that would bring their like Xbox on an overnight?
Oh no, I've got my ROG Ally, the handheld gaming deal.
Oh,
It
yeah.
saved my life. I used to bring my laptop, and now I bring that thing, and it's a great replacement.
Yeah, for sure. I have found when I was at the regional, there were a handful of people that would bring a big console with them and just hook it up in the hotel room. And I mean, as soon as I saw that console, I knew like, oh, we're not hanging out. This guy's gonna be gone.
As far as like the hanging out thing, that's another thing is like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you're traveling all over the place. You must be exploring and having fun. And I'm like, yeah, maybe the first time if I'm really interested in the city. I'm like, a lot of times, yeah, I don't even leave my room. It's just, one, it's just money that I don't have to spend, and two, It's just like, there's only so much you can do, you're not.
I know, but I try, no matter where we are, unless we're at some place where you can't go out and walk, like some, usually we don't stay in very sketchy places, but I try to get outside, get some fresh air, see the people, especially if I'm in another country. I try to find the things to love about a new culture. Because like being a student of the world is important for our family. And so, but I'm with you. It's hard to force yourself outside, but once I get out, man, I'm like, all right, this is better. But
Yeah,
short
for
overnights
sure.
and stuff like that. Or I was in Annapolis the other day. It was freezing cold.
Yeah. One of the things, again, a lot of people will say that flight sims can get a little boring. Train sims can get a little boring. Trucks and all that. Those kind of simulators can get a little boring. And so with 2024, they've really tried to ramp up the gamification by giving you goals. Having the new career mode and stuff like that. And I guess they figure that the more passive flight simmer, someone who just thought it was fun to just hop in the airplane, fly around, and don't really care about procedures, can now start getting into it more if they have goals. Where people like myself, we belong to the virtual airlines. I'm chasing that next rank. I'm trying to make, senior captain. I'm trying to fly into these airports that I've never flown into. I want to, like one of the things I love, part of virtual Delta is if you want to log those hours, you have to stick to the aircraft for your rank. So everybody starts as a first officer, and you can only fly small regional airplanes for several hundred hours.
Oh
And
my.
until you can make the rank of, captain or junior captain and all that stuff, then you can bump up to, the smaller airliners and, go up from there. And so it kind of gives you a reason to fly. They've got, what
Do
do
you
they
have to
call it?
wear do you have to wear a hat if you're going virtual Delta?
No, you don't.
Okay.
They're not that cool. But yeah, they'll have daily events and flights that they recommend you can do. Some flights they'll have recommendations for where you'll get like double the hours if you fly it, so it helps you
Oh.
get the ranks a little faster. You get virtual money to help purchase things, and it really is that if you were, let's say, on one of the older sims, outside of 2024, you had to make your path.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
It wasn't just it tells you to go from point A to point B, and so you're doing it because that's part of the game. It was you're completely open to the world, and if you just wanted to for fun go someplace, it's up to you. And so joining one of the virtual airlines definitely pushed me to go to airports I've never heard of, to fly approaches that were difficult for sure, and to try to keep to a time schedule. With the FedEx, they'll have recommended weights, and even just flying a big heavy aircraft and dealing with that. I've definitely had times in which I wanted to fly a route with a virtual airline, and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go here because I just want to fly into this place I've never flown, and then I start punching up the weights, and it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to take off or get into this airport because you're too heavy, and you're just
Yeah.
like, ah.
It's pretty realistic. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Man, I think when it comes down to it, the idea, the huge advancements and the investment that they're putting into these flight simulators is really beneficial for somebody that's learning, but also like if you just want to go have fun and do the things that are,
Mm-hmm.
you got time to burn and you want to do some routes or you want to set up an entire ecosystem, like you have the ability to do what you want and how you want to do it. And that's the cool part about this. And it helps build community too. Right. So
Oh yeah, for sure.
hopefully you can start passing on guard to listen to my show. But,
Yeah.
man, Phillip, thank you for coming to talk to the pilot about this experience. I thought it was so interesting when you reached out to me. I was like super stoked because I've always wanted to have this conversation about the way that you can intricately use outside things to make yourself a better pilot. And I love that. And so thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for talking to the pilots today.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, pilots, that's the episode. I hope you've really enjoyed it. But before you go, do me a quick favor, subscribe to my show and leave me a review. Give me a 1-star review if it was totally worthless. Give me a 5-star review if it was the most amazing thing you've ever heard. I want to hear from you. So if you can give me a review, subscribe to the podcast, make yourself a little bit better, I will be happy. You'll be happy. We'll keep crushing. I cannot wait to see you on the next episode.